So hello and welcome everybody. My name is Laura Barlow and I'm the Head of Content and Strategy here at Southerly Communications. So I'm very excited to be able to talk to you about this topic today, as I just think it's something that we're all constantly challenged with, and it's something that we're facing every day, all the time, in everything that we do. So today we'll be talking about change communication and how we can make good communication easy, taking your employees on a successful change journey. So a little bit about this webinar. It will run for about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And unfortunately, we've had a bit of a problem with our submitting questions ability. But if you have any questions, feel free to email them in to info@hellosoutherly.com, and I'll do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. And we'll also send a copy of the webinar around to all those who have attended after as well. So let's kick it off. So just a little bit about myself. As I said before, my name is Laura Barlow, and I work for Southerly Communications, and we're a content agency partner that works with our clients to achieve the outcomes they need through creative and engaging comms. And we deliver a whole range of services, so brand communication, internal communications, recruitment marketing, social media, and of course, change communications. I'm originally from Wellington, New Zealand, hence a bit of an accent, and my background is largely in the government and the insurance sectors. And personally, I have a real passion for helping businesses understand and better connect with their customers and staff. And of course, I feel very passionately about change communication. So it's really exciting to be here today. Okay, so a bit about the agenda of today's webinar. First of all, I'm going to talk through a little bit about the types of change. So what do we actually mean by change communications? Then talk a bit about the human response to change and how it can affect employees. And then we're going to move on to the change communication cycle. And that's when we're going to get down to sort of more practical, tactical advice in terms of a plan of action for how you can roll out a change communications program, including a bit about understanding your audiences, setting key objectives, messages, and communication channels. And finally, how you can actually measure whether or not your change communication program was a success. Great. So this quote I absolutely love. I know it's a bit cliche and we've seen it often, but it's so true. And even more today, more than any other time. So the main reasons why change is so prevalent now, there's many, but one of the most obvious really is the rise of the digital age and the fact that technology is changing so quickly and we're needing to adapt almost every day to new bits of technology coming out. Another one is the 2008 financial crisis. So that obviously had a big impact on today's organisations, as often they're aiming for reductions in efficiencies and competitiveness. And this can result in regular budget cuts and as a result, restructures and massive change programs. There seems to be a lot of sort of big transformational vision and value-based programs at the moment in the comms environment. But there's also, lots of small changes going on as well. So it's not just the big ones. There's constant things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I thought this was interesting, and some research done by the Government Communication Services, UK Government Communication Services this year, shows that on average, organisations undergo a big change about once every 3 years. So that's really significant that research took place this year. I know for myself, personal experience, in my first 5 years of working, I actually underwent 2 restructures. So that's just me. So yeah, it's a really interesting stat, that one. And this one here, so what types of change are you trying to communicate? So again, it doesn't have to just be big transformational change I'm talking about. It can really be anything. So technology improvements, new HR systems that are coming into effect, new financial systems or billing systems, retiring products or closing down things, or even just things like internal process changes. So it's a whole raft of things that could be happening. There's also a whole lot of communication challenges that come with these changes. And these can come from telling staff, keeping them informed, any training requirements they might need, if you have to undertake a consultation process, and of course, the impact of that on your customers or the external public. So given all these changes and all these challenges, it's not a surprise that change fatigue is a real thing, and it's something many organisations are facing. And sorry, I'll just go back a bit. That can have a real effect on employee engagement. So too much change or badly communicated change can actually result in disengaged employees. They can begin to feel as they might not have a voice, they aren't being treated as individuals, and this can actually result in a loss of productivity in their jobs or reduction in staff participation, and even a decrease in the quality of customer service. And how people respond to change can also be a deeply personal thing, depending on their background and their stage of career, or actually what might be happening at home as well. But in contrast, others can immediately recognise it as an opportunity. They might not see it as a negative thing at all. So, all these complexities make it really difficult to know where to start when communicating change. And as a starting point, I always like to use what's called the change curve, because most human responses can actually be mapped against this curve. So I use this model quite a bit, so I'll talk you through this a bit. So the change curve is not new. It's actually been around since the 1960s. It was developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and it was actually designed to explain the grieving process. So I know that sounds rather morbid, but the model actually holds true when it comes to business, work, or employment changes as well. So this one's quite a detailed model, but you can actually break it into 4 key stages. So this is the 4 stages that most people go through as they adjust to change. So when a change is first introduced, people's initial reaction might be shock or denial as they react to the challenge, to the status quo. And this is stage 1. And pretty much once the reality of the change starts to hit, people tend to react negatively and they might move into stage 2. So this is the anger, blame, and bargain phase. And as a result, the organisation might experience a bit of disruption, or the project team looking after the change. And if not carefully managed, this can quickly spiral into chaos. So as long as people stay in stage 2, the change will be unsuccessful, or at least for the people that react in this way. And this is really, stressful and unpleasant stage. And actually lots of communication programs get stuck in this stage and they fail to move forward. And for everyone, it's much healthier to move on to stage 3, which is, people stop focusing on what they've lost and they start to let go and accept the change. They begin testing and exploring what this means, and they learn that the reality of what's good and what's not so good and how they must adapt. So it's a bit more of an understanding phase. And it's not until they get to stage 4 where they accept the changes, and actually many people start to embrace them. They can start to rebuild their ways of working, and it's only when people really get to stage 4 that an organisation or a project or a team can start to reap the benefits of change. So really, to help, what we want to talk about today is to help shift people from stage 2 to stage 3 and 4. And an easy way to do this is using a simple 6-step cycle, which I'll talk through, which is the change communication cycle. So here it's really as simple as it looks. So understanding the audience, planning and recommending best how to reach them, agreeing goals and KPIs, prioritising the messages, sending these out through the right channels, and then measuring the results. So I'll delve into each of these steps as we talk through the rest of the webinar. And I've also included a bit of practical tips as well, ideas to help kind of kickstart your thinking. So first of all, you need to come up with a strategy or a plan of action. So all good communication campaigns need to be underpinned by a clear strategy. And actually discussing change or change communications, it's no different. You need to apply the same methodology. So this is pretty much what you're trying to achieve. So setting your key objectives, who you're talking to and how you're going to communicate it. So developing some personas, key messages, timeframes, and measurement. So the first step, you need to set your key objectives. So when setting objectives for change communications, it's always crucial to use the SMART objectives methodology, and that is specific, measurable, achievable, thank you very much, at a moment, realistic and timely. So I've got a bit of a personal example here. I was once responsible for communicating quite a big change program that was about closing a large insurance product. So it had two impacts, one on the staff that looked after the insurance product and obviously on the customers that had this product themselves. And it was a health and safety product. So if they had, good health and safety systems in place, then they got a discount. So it was one that was quite loved because there was a big chunky incentive at the end of it. So when I was setting my objectives for this change program, I knew that it would be unrealistic, for example, to set a goal that my employees who I was trying to communicate this change to would be very happy about this change. And that they wouldn't be afraid, and maybe some would potentially leave. So instead, we needed to shift them from one product and upskill them and teach them about another product so they can move over to another team. So, for example, one of the goals that I set myself for this change program was to retain about 95% of the staff within a 6-month period and make sure their engagement scores didn't fall below 80%. So it wasn't, I wasn't aiming for 100% satisfaction and I wasn't expecting that everyone would be happy with the change. But because I was, specific and I was realistic and I set myself a longer time frame, we were able to achieve this goal. So this is really important. The next step is understanding your audience. So this is really key in change communication. So really you've got to ask yourself this question: how can you communicate effectively if you don't know who you're talking to? So the best way to do this is to gather as much information about the audience, so the ones that are experiencing the change or who will be impacted by the change, because you really need to take the time to understand what makes them tick. And by building a clear picture of their hopes and their fears for the project, you will know how to structure your messages most effectively. So this is a two-way process. It's really important. So that involves listening to your staff, creating forums for people to ask questions and have face-to-face conversations with their line managers. So you really need to understand what works for them. So there's some ways that you can gather this information. I suggest you use multiple ways, not just one. So for example, talk to your HR team or do a bit of research yourself about your staff, how long they've been there, even their ages, where do they work remotely, do they have line managers or are they independently managed? You can also do a bit of an audit of your current channels to work out, are they using the intranet? Do they open their emails when they receive them? Do they look at internal newsletters? So it's always worth getting a baseline measure of those. I would also suggest running, if you don't do this already, you can run regular pulse surveys. So this is a great way to measure engagement at a point in time. They're usually about 10 questions long and really easy to answer. And you can push them out, once a month, once a quarter, whenever you feel like you need to kind of gauge how people are reacting. And there's, lots of free tools to do this, including SurveyMonkey, which we use regularly. You can also organise face-to-face communications to understand. So you could hold little workshops to, figure out what different teams are like, how they're made up, what are their fears. And you can also have polls and question inboxes as well. So asking them what they want and how they best like to be communicated to. So once you've gathered all this information, all the data that you need, you can create employee personas. And each group will need a different set of key messages, or each persona that will help them along the change journey. So this is why creating personas is so important. Personas are really fictional characters which are created to represent the different needs, goals, motivation, and behaviours of your employees or these groups. And they're extremely useful because they help you conceptualise what a person will need or want in real life. And I actually find them extremely useful for having internal conversations with your stakeholders, referring to the personas rather than talking about individuals or whole teams. It can be quite daunting. They're also extremely useful when developing your overarching strategy, as they can help you define your key messages, what channels you'd use for each persona, and the timing of these messages as well. So they just help simplify, especially useful with big organizations. Great. And the actual messages themselves. So this is really important with change communications. And it's all really about the 3 C's. Your messages need to be clear, consistent, and compelling. And you need to agree them up front. So this is really important and often actually worth doing right at the beginning with senior management or whoever it is implementing the change. You need to agree what the 2 to 3 key messages are and make sure they're consistent. So first of all, clear. Keep things as simple as possible. Even when you're communicating complex information, you should always make sure that it's delivered in a way that people can quickly understand. And this is actually often a pitfall with technology change programs as well. So often we just dive into the complexity of what's happening behind the scenes, when people often just need to know what's happening, when, and how it will impact them. So it's also really important to be rational and honest with your employees. So particularly if some of the upcoming changes might be job losses or changes to their roles, or they might present some really big challenges for certain people. Your employees might not like what they're hearing, but they will react better long term if they can feel confident they have access to all the facts and information. So that's really important. Consistency. So this is a big one for change communications. The messages must remain constant through the whole change process. All line managers, key departments, specifically HR, internal communications, and any senior leaders heading up the changes need to be delivering the same information across every channel. So any inconsistency will cause confusion and actually potentially a bit of resentment, because people can latch on to things when they think, oh, that's not what so-and-so said over here. So one way to do this that we'd recommend is, if it is quite a big change, is developing line manager packs with key messages and content that they can actually use and distribute. And also some talking points that managers can talk to their teams about. Just helps them feel really confident they know what they're talking about, and also ensures that everyone in the organisation gets the consistent message. And once you know what you're saying and how you're going to deliver it, then you need to make sure it's really compelling as well. So think about ways that will make your messages stand out and receive the attention they need and deserve. So what I mean by this is, put some strong headlines in there or call to actions. Develop some images that will, could make it a little bit more interesting. So for example, you could do some icons that represent different stages of a change or represent different departments, or anything that you think will capture their attention. I'm just going to quickly have a glass of water. Okay, great. And now we get on to talk about what channels to use. Now, often this is just as simple as using the information you received when you're gathering the persona information. So use the channels that they've identified. So depending on what they've said they like to use, here's a number of ideas. So this could include, team meetings, one-to-one. So what I said before about the managers packs. If they're social media, they might like to see the messages on there. Email and Yammer, so that's actually worth doing the content audit to see what people are actually using. And really importantly for change communications, and this is often overlooked, you need to have some sort of tangible example of change. So rather than just doing internet articles or sending them emails, it's always worth developing something that they can keep, like a lanyard, or we were discussing yesterday, even things like a chocolate in the icon, or a desk calendar, a flyer, or a USB stick with a new logo on it representing the change. Just anything that they can see from this day onwards, there is a change in effect. The reason why this is so important is because often these things are happening in the background, and also change doesn't happen overnight. So just because you've launched a new HR system, for example, doesn't mean everyone's going to jump on that day to work it. But they will be aware, because you've given them a lanyard or a little flyer on their desk, that this is the day that it has started. The other thing is to, turn these things into conversation. So make sure that this is not just a one-off. You don't just communicate the message one time. You need to continue to check in with your staff members, have regular team meetings, ask them for their questions, ask them how they're going, keep the inbox open. So what we've put there is turn these monologues into conversations. It's also worth considering the different types of stakeholders who may need to be involved in change. And this varies obviously depending on your organisation. So large ones might have access to independent teams of HR people or training and development units. But also you could think about people, if you have a smaller organisation, who could represent these, or a good person to be an ambassador for each of these areas. So many people can become ambassadors. It's always worth identifying individuals that will move through these stages faster than others, because they can become your cheerleaders and they can push the others along. So that's always the first place that I'd start, is identifying those people that are really on board with the change, and get them to be the spokespeople for you. Senior management and line managers also need to become ambassadors and really lead from the front. So a bit of advice here would be, for example, getting your CEO or line managers to, or senior leaders, to do some floor walks or some informal chats, walk around, talk to people about how it might be impacting them. You also might want to consider getting human resources on board and supporting them in terms of any role changes and what that might mean for individuals. Also, there's an opportunity to talk to third parties as well. So if you do need external advice, if you would like a third party to come in and give their perspective, that's always worth considering. And of course, training and development as well. So making sure staff have the training they might need to adapt to a new situation. Great. And finally, you really want to know if everything that you've been doing has worked. So the best way to do this is through measurement. And this is also something that I'm extremely passionate about. So you want to establish how well the messages have been understood, gauge how staff are feeling about it, and highlight any concerns that may have arisen as a result of a change. So the key thing here to note is that with change communications, often you'll need to change your approach as you go, just because sometimes messages won't land, or they may be misunderstood, or there's just things that happen along the way. And measuring how you're going actually gives you the ability to adjust and adapt as you go, rather than waiting to the end and realizing, oh no, we're still in stage 2, we haven't managed to actually shift anyone along. So if we think back to what we said earlier about gauging all the information for the personas, here again, this is where it's really useful. You can go back and look at those initial pulse surveys, for example, see if it's changed from then until now on people's engagement levels. The first survey or the first sort of audit you do on how people are feeling is the opportunity to establish the baseline measures that we're talking about. You can also include questions within existing staff employment surveys. So I know, most organisations do one a year, for example. You could ask them a specific question relating to your change program. And you can also just, as I said before, go around to each group, go to team meetings, run workshops, find out what the impact has been, measure how it's affected staff retention, measure how often people are using the program if it's a technology change program. But I put a big caution at the bottom here, because you only really want to carry out an employee survey or ask them what they think if you're going to act on the information you gain. Now, just to be clear, it doesn't mean that you have to do exactly what people say, or you're not promising anything. All you have to reassure people is that you've listened to them, you've understood, and if you can't do something, you have to explain why that is. So it's just about providing that context to them and making sure they really understand where they're at. And this is all about giving employees a voice, making them feel like they've been listened to, and that you really are serious about taking them on this change process. Great. And people and processes, as I said before, they don't change overnight. So successful change is all about keeping the momentum going. It's really easy to underestimate the length of time required, but most change initiatives will benefit from a communication plan that ensures a steady flow of information and continues even once the change has taken place. So we always suggest, giving yourself a couple of months, or at the very minimum, really, to start communicating change, a launch sort of change communication plan, and then a follow-up, just to make sure that you're really clear, people have a good understanding, they feel like they've been listened to, they feel like you're just not expecting them to pick it all up on day one. So you need to share the information across the entire business as well, not just with those who will be directly impacted. So yes, we do want to focus our attention on those people, but it's not to say that others in the organisation don't need to know. So it's always worth considering them as well. It's the wider audience. That's crucial because they might come into contact with those who are directly impacted. So it's really important that people need to be sensitive about these things, or be aware that, they are going through a period of change. And again, this has to be a two-way process. It involves listening to staff and creating forums for people to ask questions and have face-to-face conversations. So, we all know the stat that you need to hear something or read something at least 7 times to really understand it. And this is really true for change communication. So just checking in regularly. And giving people the multiple opportunities and channels to share their concerns and ask questions. So, there's no point just having an inbox, for example, saying, submit your questions here and we'll come back to you. You need to make sure you're giving people multiple channels to be able to do this. So an inbox might be appropriate for one person, but actually someone might prefer to sit down and have a face-to-face chat with their line manager about it. So it's really important that this is consistent and it's continuous. So if we think back to that change cycle before that I showed you at the beginning, that's circular, and it's circular for a reason. We just need to continue to keep this momentum. Great, and just to finish on the slide here, change, it brings opportunity. So often, and this is really the key message from today, when we're communicating change, we always need to think about it as like a positive thing, a chance to improve. It's a chance to do something different, bring in something that will work better, or change the process that we do to improve it. Or long term, it's about making things easier and better. So it's happening now. It's a train we all have to jump on. So it's about getting people enthusiastic and excited about it. And even more than it's so important right now, and it's not going anywhere. Great. So that's really it today. It's a little bit shorter than I anticipated, just because I was hoping to ask you a bit of a few questions back and forth, but that's okay. So hopefully you've found that really useful. As I said before, I'm really happy to answer any questions you might have, and we also have a bit more information and guides on each steps of these as well. So if there's something that you have a particular question about, or you want more information on something that I mentioned, I'm really happy to pull this together. So just email me, and we'll also be sending out an email this afternoon as well, just asking what you thought of the presentation, any feedback or tips or questions that you might have. So feel free to fill that out for us. That will be a big help. So thanks again for joining me. It's been really awesome to talk to you all today, and I look forward to our next webinar early next year. We'll send that out in our client newsletter, and also be advertising it on our social media channels as well, and on our website. So yeah, talk to you soon. Thanks.